Most people think power comes from fleets, alliances, or GDP rankings. But real control usually begins somewhere quieter, along routes, ports, and corridors. Take the Malacca Strait. Nearly one-third of global maritime trade passes through it. That single choke point already explains more than most headlines ever will. The idea that Washington can simply contain China assumes the world still works like it did during the Cold War. It doesn't. Today, influence moves through supply chains, infrastructure, and embedded systems. This isn't about military dominance. It's about limits, structural limits, that shape every decision both sides can make. We'll walk through this step by step, showing how geography, economics, and timing steadily close off options. And the final reason isn't the one most people expect. By the end of this video, you'll understand why geography makes China structurally hard to isolate. Geography sets the opening limit. At the Malacca Strait, tankers and container ships compress into a narrow lane before turning toward Shanghai and Shenzhen. China doesn't begin from isolation. It begins from intersection. 14 land borders and rail corridors through Kazakhstan and Russia create redundancy long before any carrier group arrives. Pressure builds quietly. Washington leans on maritime presence. Beijing builds inland routes. Pause. The assumption breaks here. Oceans alone no longer define access. As sea leverage rises, overland capacity expands, not enclosure, connectivity. Choices narrow. Full blockade becomes impractical. Partial pressure becomes permanent. From that moment, containment shifts from systemic to regional. What disappears first is simplicity. What follows is dispersion. The consequence is structural. Every corridor reduces coercive reach, not dominance, position. Next, economics begins doing what navies cannot. Supply chains will decide more than fleets. Subscribe to Global War's timeline for deeper strategic analysis. Today, global supply chains bind both sides. Cost arrives before strategy. Inside Shenzhen's factory districts, circuit boards, batteries, and casings move from line to line with practiced speed. These are not optional outputs. They are inputs for Western households, hospitals, and data centers. Pressure builds as dependence becomes visible. Tariffs rise, export reviews tighten, warehouses thin. Pause. The assumption fails quietly. Decoupling sounds decisive, but inflation answers faster than policy. Retail prices climb, inventories stall, political tolerance shortens, choices narrow, broad separation becomes electorally impossible. Sanctions become selective. Not leverage, mutual exposure. China absorbs demand internally. The United States absorbs voter anger. From here, containment loses credibility as an economic tool. What disappears is scale. What remains is friction. Every delayed shipment compresses timelines. Every disrupted component forces compromise, not reach, position. And that opens the door to infrastructure doing what markets cannot. Concrete starts carrying influence across ports and corridors in quiet ways for now. Infrastructure creates parallel influence. Ports rewrite allegiance. At Gwadar on Pakistan's coast, cranes swing over new quays while access roads stretch inland. It looks commercial. It functions strategic. Pressure accumulates as financing meets geography. Rail links extend. Power stations follow. Host governments gain options outside Western lenders. Pause. The logic tightens. Influence now travels inside contracts. Washington responds with statements. Beijing responds with concrete. Choices narrow. Countries no longer face a binary. They negotiate terms, not persuasion. Position. Debt concerns surface, but infrastructure remains. Containers keep moving. From here, leverage fragments. Each port becomes a node. Each rail yard a decision point. What disappears is exclusivity. What remains is duplication. Every completed terminal reduces reliance on legacy systems. Every corridor absorbs future pressure, not dominance, timing. And once alternatives exist, alignment becomes optional. Alliances will start hedging across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East over the next decade in quiet corridors for governments. Most countries refuse binary alignment fractures at Singapore's container terminals, where U.S. naval visits coexist with Chinese cargo contracts. Southeast Asian capitals learned early that survival comes from balance, not loyalty. Pressure builds as Washington asks partners to choose. Trade ministries quietly refuse. Pause. Security cooperation stays American. Economic growth leans Chinese. The contradiction hardens. Governments sign defense agreements with one hand, infrastructure deals with the other. Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Gulf states all follow the same pattern, not alliance. Autonomy, choices narrow. Once export revenue depends on Beijing, full alignment becomes politically dangerous. What disappears is coalition discipline. What replaces it is transactional diplomacy, not unity, optionality. Every hedging capital weakens enforcement. Every mixed partnership dilutes pressure. From here, containment fractures into regional compromises instead of global coordination. Influence becomes negotiated, not commanded. And when sovereignty overrides strategy, leverage evaporates quietly. China's internal market now begins absorbing shocks that alliances can no longer apply. China's domestic scale absorbs external shock scale, becomes insulation inside Chongqing's logistics hubs, where freight trains funnel inward instead of outward. When export pressure rises, production doesn't stop. It redirects. Pressure builds as tariffs and controls push factories toward China's own consumers. Retail networks expand. Regional distribution replaces overseas shipping. Pause, the assumption fades. China does not need every foreign buyer anymore. Internal demand absorbs volume. State banks smooth volatility. Provincial planners reallocate capacity. Choices narrow. External coercion loses impact. Economic pain no longer concentrates at the border. Not fragility, absorption. What disappears is leverage through trade disruption. What remains is endurance through scale. Every redirected shipment shortens Washington's timeline. Every domestic sale weakens foreign influence. From here, sanctions shift from pressure tools to symbolic gestures. Containment becomes slower, less visible, harder to measure, not exposure, buffer. And when markets stop transmitting pain efficiently, strategy loses its feedback loop. Technology restrictions will try to replace trade pressure. Next, technology restrictions fragment, not halt. Progress denial begins at chip fabs. Inside SMIC's facilities, production lines adjust to new constraints, while engineers redesign processes around unavailable tools. The objective shifts from matching Western performance to maintaining forward motion. Pressure builds as export controls tighten. Advanced lithography disappears. Component access narrows. Pause, the assumption breaks quietly. Innovation does not stop, it reroutes. China substitutes, iterates. Accepts inefficiency in exchange for autonomy. Choices narrow. Washington can slow timelines but cannot erase capability, not access, iteration. Parallel ecosystems emerge. Domestic suppliers replace foreign ones. Research clusters multiply. What disappears is technological dependency. What remains is permanent competition. Every restriction accelerates substitution. Every workaround reduces future leverage. From here, containment loses its precision. Controls become blunt, not denial, delay. And delay favors the system willing to tolerate friction longer. Time itself now becomes a strategic asset in this contest. China operates on multi-decade planning cycles. Planning replaces urgency inside development zones tied to Beijing's 5-year frameworks, where industrial clusters align with objectives that stretch past electoral calendars. Projects don't chase quarterly returns. They compound over decades. Pressure builds as Washington resets strategy every administration. Priorities shift, funding pauses, policies reverse. Pause, the asymmetry settles in. One side plans continuity, the other manages cycles. Choices narrow. Long projects struggle inside short mandates. Infrastructure momentum migrates east, not speed. Endurance. China absorbs early inefficiencies because time remains available. The United States optimizes for immediate outcomes because voters demand results. What disappears is strategic patience. What remains is reactive policy. Every delayed initiative widens the planning gap. Every abandoned program strengthens China's positional advantage. From here, timing becomes leverage, not momentum, persistence. And when timelines diverge, control follows the longer horizon. Military power will try to compensate for lost time. Military power cannot seal economic space presence concentrates at Yokosuka and Guam, where carrier strike groups rotate through familiar waters. The ships are imposing, their reach is real, but commerce keeps moving beyond their arcs. Pressure builds as planners model blockade scenarios. Insurance markets react first. Energy prices spike on simulations alone. Pause. The limitation becomes visible. Fleets deter conflict, they do not regulate trade. Choices narrow. Any serious maritime cutoff triggers global shock before Chinese capitulation. Not control, deterrence. Naval dominance protects lanes, it cannot manage supply chains. What disappears is enforceability. What remains is restraint. Every war game ends the same way, unacceptable economic fallout. From here, military leverage retreats to last resort status. Not dominance, constraint. And once force becomes unusable, containment loses its hard edge. The final pressure comes from inside the global system itself. China is embedded inside global institutions. Constraint emerges inside boardrooms, not battlefields. At the WTO in Geneva, China sits inside the same rule framework meant to regulate it. Voting blocs form. Development banks coordinate. Trade disputes move through paperwork, not patrols. Pressure builds as Washington searches for exclusion mechanisms. None scale cleanly. Pause. The reality settles. You cannot remove a core node without destabilizing the network. Choices narrow. Expulsion becomes self-harm. Reform becomes the only path, not outsider, central participant. China works inside legacy institutions while funding parallel ones. Influence spreads horizontally. Procedures slow confrontation. What disappears is the option of isolation. What remains is negotiated coexistence. Every committee seat dilutes unilateral action. Every multilateral process stretches timelines, not removal, management. From here, containment collapses into system maintenance. And when governance replaces coercion, power becomes procedural. The deepest limitation isn't China. It's the architecture of the world itself. Containment fails because the world has changed. The system reveals itself on global trade maps, where shipping lanes, data routes, and financial clearing networks overlap into a single operating field. Power no longer sits outside this structure. It lives inside it. Pressure resolves here. China was never an external rival waiting to be boxed in. It grew as a central node while the system expanded around it. Every corridor, standard, and institution became connective tissue. Pause. The deepest truth settles quietly. Containment was built for isolated powers. This world produces integrated ones. Choices disappear. Suppression gives way to management. Strategy shifts from control to calibration, not dominance, constraint. Long-term consequences follow. Competition becomes permanent. Influence becomes positional. Crisis response replaces grand design. What vanishes is the option to reset the board. What remains is continuous adjustment inside shared infrastructure. This isn't a failure of will. It's a transformation of power itself. Geography still decides. Technology still amplifies. Timing still closes doors. Subscribe to Global War's timeline for serious geopolitical analysis.